Hey seniors, what's up? We're going to talk about the March on Washington today, which was organized by the moderate wing of the civil rights movement, or those who continue to support integration and who continue to support the nonviolent methods of Martin Luther King Jr. Now, they are differentiated now from those who are questioning or rejecting integration, saying the black community should just separate from the white community, and also those who are saying that the nonviolent methods are ineffective. We black people have to be ready now to rise up in self-defense when they are met with violent white supremacist violence. Okay, so now we see two different wings within the movement emerging. Okay, what very definitively with very definitively different ideas about how to go forward. All right, and so the the more militant wing says, forget it, we're not interested in John F. Kennedy's Civil Rights Bill, which he introduced in the summer of 1963, because it's too little too late. Okay, and the moderates would agree that the bill is not adequate as it is. It doesn't have anything about police brutality in it. It doesn't have anything about the prevention of racial discrimination in terms of employment. So the moderates are also questioning and not fully happy with John F. Kennedy's bill, but they say, look, it's better than nothing, and it's a starting place. And so they're going to say, look, we can add to it, we can improve it, but it's a place to start. Okay, so the moderates support it, and they organized the March on Washington for August of 1963 to rally support for John F. Kennedy's Civil Rights Bill. Now, originally they're envisioning the march not just as a way of building support for the bill, but of also encouraging congressmen to add to the bill, right, to improve it from their perspective, and to add in particular something about preventing racial discrimination in terms of employment. So, in addition to the march, there was going to be like several days of demonstration. They were going to have sit-ins at congressional offices and all sorts of things. Okay, well, John F. Kennedy doesn't like any of this. Number one, he's worried about unrest and violence, okay, because the white supremacist violence in Birmingham, of course, gave rise to a greater willingness on the part of more and more black people to rise up in self-defense when protesters get attacked by white supremacists. And then that causes more violence on the part of the white supremacists. So the whole thing can build on itself. Now, and the unrest grows, and so John F. Kennedy's worried about that. But he's also worried about divisions within his own political party, the Democrat Party. Okay, the Democrat Party is now deeply divided. When Kennedy introduced the Civil Rights Bill in the summer of 1963, it outraged the Southern Democrats. He's a Democrat. The Southern Democrats are outraged. And Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy's vice president, a Texas politician, was supposed to pacify the Southern Democrats, was supposed to get them on John F. Kennedy's side, to not object to the Civil Rights Bill. It didn't really work. The party is splintering. And so John F. Kennedy does not want this division to get worse, okay? So he doesn't want a big demonstration in Washington in support of his bill, okay? And he's working with King and other leaders organizing the movement, the march, to scale back the plans, to change the language of the speeches, right? He wants to really moderate everything about the march, okay? And he's pretty effective in getting them to agree to it. Now, so what happens is the march is going to be only on one day. They're going to march from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. And I don't know if you've been to Washington, but that's not very far from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial, right? It's not that far, okay? And then they'll go hear some speeches at the Lincoln Memorial, and then that'll be it. Okay, and in addition to that, they put these rules in place. They say the demonstrators have to be respectably dressed, and they're going to close the liquor stores on the day of the march. Now, both of these things behind them are racist assumptions. One, that the demonstrators will not dress respectably, or that they will drink. Okay, well, this is, of course, very offensive to black people, obviously. And many of the people involved in the march, when they hear about these rules, are upset about it. You have, in particular, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, one of the original groups that got the direct action campaigns, the sit-ins, and the freedom rides going. The leadership of this group is really upset about it. You had John Lewis, who was one of the freedom riders who got beat up several times in 1961. He's now the leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, really upset about these rules and the racist assumptions behind them, but they get him to agree to go forward and participate in the march and to give a speech, okay? But even right up until the day of the speech, Kennedy, he read Lewis's speech. He thought he didn't like some of the language. He wanted to change it. Right up until the time Lewis is about to go up to the podium to give the speech, these black activists are trying to convince him to change the language to whatever, so that it won't worry the Kennedy administration. And Lewis does at the last minute agree to it. Okay, so all of this sort of control that Kennedy is exerting over the march kind of overshadows it from the point of view of the civil rights leadership. But nonetheless, for the nonviolent wing of the party, this is a tremendously triumphant moment, okay? First of all, they get a huge crowd. It was 250,000 people. That was, up to that point, the largest known crowd to assemble for a political rally. You also get 50,000 white people in the crowd. So you get, especially from 63 on, a lot of more white involvement in the civil rights movement. You had several white leaders who were helping organize the march, clergymen, union leaders, so on and so forth. And among the 50,000 white people who were there are very famous, popular musicians like Bob Dylan. Okay, Bob Dylan, who is kind of in 1963 leading a folk music protest movement, and he just come out with this album, The Freewheeling Bob Dylan. Or I don't know if it had come out yet, but it came out in 1963. And in there's several songs that are kind of critiquing the arms race in the context of the Cold War, but also the segregation of the South, so critiquing American culture from within the tradition of folk music. That wasn't really a new thing exactly, but it was suddenly becoming more and more popular among some of the young people in 1963, okay? And all the people that are gathered, whether they're white or black, for the most part, they don't know about all the things that are going on behind the scenes with Kennedy and John Lewis's speech and everything. What they see are the speeches and the great rhetoric of Martin Luther King Jr. in particular, and the high ideals that are expressed, in particular, the assertion of all human beings being equal in dignity, made in the image of God as sons and daughters of God. That's the kind of core of the Christian nonviolent wing of the civil rights movement. Okay, all right. So and it is a big rallying point where everybody's coming together, and it's this kind of this soaring rhetoric that they're listening to, and it's a great day in that sense. And you get these various speeches being made. You've also got various musicians who are performing. But the person, of course, that steals the show is Martin Luther King Jr. and his speech, the I Have a Dream speech. And he was, he gave his initial remarks and looked like he was about to sit down. And then this famous gospel singer, Mahalia Jackson, called on him to tell the crowd about his dream. And that's when he then went into the most famous part of the speech, the I Have a Dream part of the speech, okay? And so, that was definitely kind of the centerpiece of the whole event. And so it was a triumphant day in that sense, all right? In terms of what it actually accomplished on a practical scale, in terms of measurable changes, there weren't any measurable legal changes that came about as a result. Legal or political changes that came about as a result of the march. For instance, there was no congressman changed his mind about the Civil Rights Bill because of the march. Okay, so there was that. But it was kind of a triumphant moment. All right, now the bill itself is kind of stuck in the House Rules Committee. It's not seeing progress in the as you're going into the autumn of 1963. It is expected to pass in the House, but it is not. It's expected that it will also be filibustered in the Senate. That is, somebody will get up there and start talking and not stop talking and prevent a vote on the bill. So it still seems like, even though there's this bill in the works, it's a long way off from getting passed, right? Even in spite of the soaring rhetoric of the March on Washington. There's also then increasing violence in the autumn of 1963. And the most well-known, maybe, and probably most horrific thing that happens is the bombing of a church in Birmingham, in which 4 little girls are killed. Very horrific event, okay? Very traumatic event. So the violence is not going away. The white supremacist violence is not going away. All right? And Kennedy, too, is also really concerned about the divisions within his own party. And so in particular, the thing that's going to stall the bill and kind of shut it down for a little while, over a year, in terms of getting passed, is Kennedy's assassination in November of 1963. And the reason he goes to Dallas is because he's going down there to try to unify Democrats in Dallas and speak specifically to Southern Democrats, not just in Texas, but all through the South, and bring the party back together, okay? And that's why he's going down to Texas, and that's then going to be the place where Kennedy is assassinated in November 1963. All right, which we're going to talk about later in the week. All right,